So hello guys, and welcome back to another video of mine. So today I'm gonna be doing some stuffs which is English Mega Project. So the previous video is illegal from the school, so I just want to make another video of English Mega Project, which is the finale. So as you can see in the screen, that what I'm gonna do today is educate you about racism. So there's three topics which may be relatable, but maybe not. You guys as a audience correct can yeah give a correction if I do wrong. So the English before we start, I'm gonna tell you. So the English Mega Project is the task from school that I got to be a portfolio after graduation of the 12th graders. That is me. Right now I'm a 12th graders. So after we graduate, maybe we have to no, before we graduate, maybe we have to make things that can be our portfolio so that we can apply it maybe to the office to work or to go to the next stage, that is college or university, so that we can show this, or we can use the English Mega Project for things that it used to use English. So we can show this the video of English Mega Project that we've made, so that we can easily goes on our direction that we plan to go to. Okay, so without wasting of time, maybe let's just continue to the main topic. For the first topic, I'm gonna be doing racism, because I want to educate you about racism. uh, as we know that oh no before we start the content, I want to tell you that this content may be boring for you, but this is just only for English Mega Project. So I hope, yeah, hopefully you guys can get educated by me just reading the Wikipedia about the articles. Don't get bored, but if you're bored, then just skip the video. Thank you so much. Let's just start. Let's just get started. So as we know that the racism is like bad behavior anywhere, like in the school, in everywhere, right? So this bullying, a lot of people normalize this bullying act, like this is normal. No, this is not normal. Racism can be anywhere. The racism is a discrimination based on skin color or race. Okay, so this is not, you can't normalize this condition or acts. Okay, so let's just continue. So racism is the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits corresponding to inherited attributes and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. It may also mean prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against based on the superiority of one race over another. It may also mean prejudice, discrimination or antagonism directed against other people because they are of different race or ethnicity. Modern variants of racism are often based in social perceptions of biological differences between peoples. These views can take the form of social actions, practices, or beliefs, or political system, in which different races are ranked as inherently superior to or inferior to each other, based on presumed shared inheritable traits, abilities, or qualities. There have been attempts to legitimize racist beliefs through scientific means, which have been overwhelmingly shown to be unfounded. In terms of political system that supports the expression of prejudice, of aversion and discriminatory practices or laws, racist ideology may include associated social aspects such as nativism, xenophobia, otherness, segregation, hierarchical ranking, and supremacism. While the concepts of race and ethnicity are considered to be separate in contemporary social science, the two terms have a long history of equivalence in popular usage in older social science literature. Ethnicity is often used in a sense close to one traditional attribute to race, the division of human groups based on qualities assumed to be essential or innate to the group, an ancestral shared behavior. Therefore, racism and racial discrimination are often used to describe discrimination on an ethnic or cultural basis, independent of whether these differences are described as racial. According to the United Nations Convention or UNC on racial discrimination, there is no distinction between the terms racial and ethnic discrimination. The UN Convention further concludes that superiority based on racial differentiation is scientifically false, moral condemnable, socially unjust, and dangerous. The convention also declared that there is no justification for racial discrimination anywhere in theory or in practice. Racism is a relatively modern concept, arising in the European age of imperialism, the subsequent growth of capitalism, and especially the Atlantic slave trade, of which it was a major driving force. It was also a major force behind racial segregation, especially in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries in South Africa under apartheid. 19th and 20th century racism in Western culture is particularly well documented and constitutes as a reference point in studies and discourses about racism. Racism has played a role in genocides such as Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, and the genocide of Serbs, as well as colonial projects including the European colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, as well as the Soviet deportations of indigenous minorities. Indigenous peoples have been and are often subject to racist attitudes. Etymology, definition, and usage. In the 19th century, many scientists subscribed to the belief that the human population can be divided into races. The term racism is a noun describing the state of being racist or subscribing to the belief that the human population can or should be classified into races with differential abilities and dispositions, which in turn may motivate a political ideology in which rights and privileges are differentially distributed based on racial categories. The term racist may be an adjective or a noun, the latter describing a person who holds those beliefs. The origin of the root word race is not clear. Linguists generally agree that it came to the English language from Middle French, but there is no such agreement on how it generally came into Latin-based language. A recent proposal is that it derives from the Arabic "ras", which means head, beginning, origin, or the Hebrew Rosh, which was a similar meaning. Early race Early race theorists generally held the view that some races were inferior to others, and they consequently believed that the differential treatment of race was fully justified. These early theories guided pseudo-scientific research assumptions, the collective endeavors to adequately define and form hypotheses about racial difference and generally termed scientific racism, though this term is a misnomer due to the lack of any actual science making the claims. Most biologists, anthropologists, and sociologists reject a taxonomy of races in favor of more specific and or empirically verifiable criteria, such as geography, ethnicity, or a history of endogamy. Human genome research indicates that race is not a meaningful genetic classification of humans. An entry in the Oxford English Dictionary in 208 defines racialism as an earlier term than racism, but now largely superseded by it, and cites the terms racialism in 1902 quote, the revised Oxford English Dictionary cites the shorter term racism in a quote from the year 1903. It was defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, the second edition in 1989, as the theory that distinctive human characteristics and abilities are determined by race. The same dictionary termed racism a synonym of racialism, belief in the superiority of a particular race. By the end of World War II, racism had acquired the same supremacist connotations formerly associated with racialism. Racism by then implied racial discrimination, racial supremacism, and a harmful intent. The term race hatred had also been used by sociologist Frederick Hertz in the late 1920s. As its history indicates, the popular use of the word racism is relatively recent. The word came into widespread usage in the Western world in the 1930s when it was used to describe the social and political ideology of Nazism, which treated race as a naturally given political unit. It is commonly agreed that racism existed before the coinage of the word, but there is not a wide agreement on a single definition of what racism is and what it is not. Today, some scholars of racism prefers to use the concept in the plural racism in order to emphasize its many different forms that do not easily fall under a single definition. They also argue that different forms of racism have characterized different historical periods and geographical areas. Garner on 209 or 2009 till 2011 summarized different existing definitions of racism and identifies three common elements contained in those definitions of racism. The first, a historical, hierarchy of power, relationship between groups. Second, a set of ideas or an ideology about racial differences. And the third, last one, is discriminatory actions or practice. The legal. Through many countries around the globe have passed laws related to race and discrimination. The first significant international human rights instrument developed by the United Nations, or the UN, was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the UDHR, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. The UDHR recognized that if people are to be treated with dignity, they require economic rights, social rights, and including education, and the right to cultural and political participation and civil liberty. It further states that everyone is entitled to these rights without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The UN does not define racism, However, it does define racial discrimination. According to the 1965 UN International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the term said racial discrimination shall mean any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin that has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise, or on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economical, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. In the 1978 United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or as we know generally as UNESCO, Declaration on Race and Racial Prejudice, Article 1, the UN states, said that all human beings belong to a single species and are descended from a common stock. They are born equal in dignity and rights, and all forms of form an integral part of humanity. The UN definition of racial discrimination does not make any distinction between discrimination based on ethnicity and race, in part because the distinction between the two has been a matter of debate among academics, including anthropologists. Similarly, in British law, the phrase racial group means any group of people who are defined by reference to their race, color, nationality, including citizenship, or ethnic or national origin. In Norway, the word race has been removed from national laws concerning discrimination because the use of the phrase is considered problematic and unethical. The Norwegian Anti-Discrimination Act bans discrimination based on ethnicity, national origin, descent, and skin color. Social behavioral sciences. Sociologists in general recognize race as a social construct. This means that although the concepts of race and racism are based on observable biological characteristics, any conclusions drawn about race on the basis of those observations are heavily influenced by cultural ideologies. Racism, as an ideology, exists in a society at both the individual and institutional level. While much of the research and work on racism during the last half century or so has concentrated on white racism in the Western world, historical accounts of race-based social practices can be found across the globe. Thus, racism can be broadly defined to encompass individual and group prejudices and acts of discrimination that results in material and cultural advantages conferred on a majority or a dominant social group. So-called white racism focuses on societies in which white populations are the majority or the dominant social group. In studies of this majority white societies, the aggregate of material and cultural advantages is usually termed white privilege. Race and race relations are prominent areas of study in sociology and economics. Much of the sociological literature focuses on white racism. Some of the earliest sociological works on racism were penned by sociologists. W.E.B. Du Bois, the first African American to earn a doctoral degree from Harvard University, Du Bois wrote that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Wellman, 1993, defines racism as culturally sanctioned beliefs which, regardless of intentions involved, defend the advantages white have because of the subordinate position of racial minorities. In both sociology and economics, the outcomes of racist actions are often measured by the inequality in income, wealth, net worth, and access to other cultural resources such as education between racial groups. In sociology and social psychology, racial identity and the acquisition of that identity is often used as a variable in racism studies. Racial ideologies and racial identity affect individuals' perception of race and discrimination. Cazenave and Maddern in 1999 defined racism as a highly organized system of race-based group privilege that operates at every level of society and is held together by a sophisticated ideology of color or race supremacy. Racial centrality, the extent to which a culture recognizes individuals or racial identity appears to affect the degree of discrimination African American young adults perceive, whereas racial ideology may buffer the detrimental emotional effects of that discrimination. Sellers and Shelton in 2003 found that a relationship between racial discrimination and emotional distress was moderated by racial ideology and social beliefs. Some sociologists argue that, particularly in the West, where racism is often negatively sanctioned in society, racism has changed from being a blatant to a more covert expression of racial prejudice. The newer or more hidden and less easily detectable forms of racism, which can be considered embedded in social process structures, are more difficult to explore and challenge. Has been suggested that while in many countries over or explicit racism has become increasingly taboo, even among those who display egalitarian explicit attitudes, and implicit or aversive racism is still maintained subconsciously. This process has been studied extensively in social psychology as implicit association and implicit attitudes. A component of implicit cognition, implicit attitudes are evaluations that occurs without conscious awareness towards an attitude object or the self. These evaluations are generally either favorable or unfavorable. They come about from various influences in the individual experience. Implicit attitudes are not consciously identified, or they are inaccurately identified traits of past experience that mediate favorable or unfavorable feelings, thoughts, or actions towards social objects. These feelings, thoughts, or actions have an influence on behavior of which the individual may not be aware. Therefore, subconscious racism can influence our visual processing and how our minds work when we are subliminally exposed to faces of different colors. And thinking about crime, for example, social psychologist Jennifer L. Eberhard on 2004 of Stanford University holds that blackness is associated with crime. You're ready to pick out these crime objects. Such exposures influence our minds and they can cause subconscious racism in our behavior towards other people or even towards objects. Thus, racist thoughts and actions can arise from stereotypes and fears of which we are not aware. For example, scientists and activists have warned that the use of the stereotype Nigerian prince for referring to advanced fee scammers is racist. Reducing Nigeria to a nation of scammers and flagellant princes, as some people still do online, is a stereotype that needs to be called out. Humanities. Language, linguistics, and discourse are active areas of study in the humanities. Along with literature and the arts, discourse analysis seeks to reveal the meaning of race and the actions of racists through careful study of the ways in which these factors of human society are described and discussed in various written and oral works. For example, Van Dyke, quote-unquote not a football player, in 1992 examines different ways in which descriptions of racism and racist actions are depicted by the perpetrators of such actions as well as by their victims. He notes that when descriptions of action have negative implications for the majority, and especially for white elites, they are often seen as controversial, and such controversial interpretations are typically marked with quotation marks, or they are greeted with expressions of distance or doubt. The previously cited book, The Souls of Black Vote by W.E.B. Du Bois, represents early American African literature that describes the author's experience with racism when he was traveling the South as an African American. Much American fictional literature has focused on issues of racism and the black racial experience in the US, including works written by whites such as Uncle Tom's Cabin, To Kill a Mockingbird, An Imitation of Life, or even the non-fiction work Black Like Me. These books and others like them feed into what has been called the white savior narrative in film, in which the heroes or heroines are white, even though the story is about things that happen to a black character. Textual analysis of such writings can contrast sharply with black authors' description of African American and their experience in US society. African American writers have sometimes been portrayed in African American studies as retreating from racial issues when they write about whiteness, while others identify this as an African American literary tradition called the literature of white estrangement, part of a multi-pronged effort to challenge and dismantle white supremacy in the US. The popular usage. According to dictionaries, the word is commonly used to describe prejudice and discrimination based on race. Racism can also be said to describe a condition in society in which a dominant racial group benefits from the oppression of others, whether the group wants such benefits or not. Racism, for Foucauldian scholars Little McWhorter, in her 2009 book Racism and Sexual Oppression in Anglo-America, a genealogy, post-modern racism similarly focusing on the notion of a dominant group, usually whites, vying for racial purity and progress, rather than an overt or obvious ideology focused on the oppression of non-whites. In popular usage, as in some academic usage, little distinction is made between racism and ethnocentrism. Often, the two are listed together as racial and ethnic in describing some action or outcome that is associated with prejudice within a majority or dominant group in society. Furthermore, the meaning of the term racism is often conflated with the terms some action or with the terms prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination. Racism is a complex concept that can involve each of those, but it cannot be equated with nor is it synonymous with these other terms. The term is often used in relation to what is seen as prejudice within a minority or subjugated group, as the concept of reverse racism. Reverse racism is a concept often used to describe acts of discrimination or hostility against members of a dominant racial or ethnic group while favoring members of minority groups. These concepts have been used, especially in the United States, in debates over counterconscious policies such as affirmative actions intended to remedy racial inequalities. However, many experts and other commenters view reverse racism as a myth rather than a reality. Scholars commonly define racism not only in terms of individual prejudice, but also in terms of a power structure that protects the interests of the dominant culture and actively discriminates against ethnic minorities. From this perspective, while members of ethnic minorities may be prejudiced against members of the dominant culture, they lack the political and economical power to actively oppress them, and they are therefore not practicing racism. The aspects. The ideology underlying racism can manifest in many aspects of social life. Such aspects are described in this section, although the list is not exhaustive. Aversive racism. Aversive racism is a form of implicit racism in which a person's unconscious negative evaluations of racial or ethnic minorities are realized by a persistent avoidance of interaction with other racial and ethnic groups, as opposed to traditional overt racism which is characterized by overt hatred for an explicit discrimination against racial or ethnic minorities. Aversive racism is characterized by more complex, ambivalent expressions and attitudes. Aversive racism is a similar in implication to the concept of symbolic or modern racism described below, which has also a form of implicit unconscious or covert attitude which results in unconscious forms of discrimination. The term was coined by Joel Covell to describe the subtle racial behaviors of any ethnic or racial group who rationalize their aversion to a particular group by appeal to rules or stereotypes. People who have been in aversively racial way may profess egalitarian beliefs and will often deny their racially motivated behavior. Nevertheless, they can change their behavior when dealing with a member of another race or ethnic group than the one they belong to. The motivation for change is thought to be implicit or subconscious. Experiments have provided empirical supports for the existence of aversive racism. Aversive racism has been shown to have potentially serious implications for decision making in employment, in legal decisions, and in helping behavior. The color blindness. In relation to racism, color blindness is the disregard of racial characteristics in social interactions. For example, in the rejection of affirmative action as a way to address the result of past patterns of discrimination. Critics of this attitude argue that by refusing to attend to racial disparities, racial color blindness in fact unconsciously perpetuates the patterns that produce racial inequality. Eduardo Bonilla Silva argues that colorblind racism arises from an abstract liberalism, biologization of culture, naturalization of racial matters, and minimization of racism. Colorblind practices are subtle, institutional, and apparently non-racial, because race is explicitly ignored in decision making. If race is disregarded in predominantly white populations, for example, whiteness becomes the normative standard, whereas people of color are other, and the racism these individuals experience may be minimized or erased. At an individual level, people with colorblind prejudice reject racist ideology, but also reject systemic policies intended to fix institutional racism. The cultural racism manifests as societal beliefs and customs that promote the assumption that the products of a given culture, including the language and traditions of that culture, are superior to those of other cultures. It shares a great deal with xenophobia, which is often characterized by fear of or aggression toward members of an out-group by members of an in-group. In that sense, it is also similar to communalism as used in South Asia. Cultural racism exists when there is a widespread acceptance of stereotypes concerning diverse ethnic or population groups, whereas racism can be characterized by the belief that one race is inherently superior to another. Cultural racism can be characterized by the belief that one culture is inherently superior to another. The economy. Historical, economic, or social disparity is alleged to be a form of discrimination caused by past racism and historical reason, affecting the present generation through deficits in the formal education and kinds of preparation in previous generation, and though primarily unconscious racist attitudes and action on members of the general population. Economic discrimination may lead to choices that perpetuate racism. For example, color photographic film was tuned for white skin, as are automatic soap dispensers and facial recognition systems. In 2011, Bank of America agreed to pay $335 million, so a lot of money, to settle a federal government claim that its mortgage division, Countrywide Financial, discriminated against black and Hispanic homebuyers. Institutional racism, and also known as structural racism, state racism, or systemic racism, is racial discrimination by governments, corporations, Religions or educational institutions or other large organizations with the power to influence the lives of many individuals. Stokely Carmichael is credited for coining the phrase institutional racism in the late 1960s. He defined the term as the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. Maulana Karenga argued that racism constituted the destruction of culture, language, religion, and human possibility, and that the effects of racism were the morally monstrous destruction of human possibility involved redefining Africans' humanity to the world, positioning past, present, and future relations with others who only know us through his stereotyping and thus damaging the truly human relations among peoples. Othering. Othering is a term used by some to describe a system of discrimination whereby the characteristics of a group are used to distinguish them as separate from the norm. Othering plays a fundamental role in the history and continuation of racism. To objectify a culture as something different, exotic, and underdeveloped is to generalize that is not like normal society. Europe's colonial attitudes towards the Oriental exemplifies this as it was thought that the East was the opposite of the West, feminine where the West was masculine, weak where the West was strong, and traditional where the West was progressive. By making this generalization and othering the East, Europe was simultaneously dividing herself as the norm, further entrenching the gap. Much of the process of othering relies on imagined difference, or the expectation of difference. Spatial difference can be enough to conclude that we are here and the others are there, over there. Imagine difference serve to categorize people into groups and assign them characteristics that suit the imaginer's expectations. Racial discrimination. Racial discrimination refers to discrimination against someone on the basis of their race. Racial segregation. Racial segregation is the separation of humans into socially constructed racial groups in daily life. It may apply to activities such as eating in a restaurant, drinking from a water fountain, using bathroom, attending school, going to the movies, or in the rental or purchase of a home. Segregation is generally outlawed, but may exist through social norms, even when there is no strong individual's preference for it, as suggested by Thomas Kelling's models of segregation and subsequent work. Supremacism. Centuries of European colonialism in the Americas, Africa, and Asia were often justified by white supremacist attitudes. During the early 20th century, the phrase "the white man's burden" was widely used to justify an imperialist policy as a noble enterprise, a justification for the policy of conquest and the subjugation of Native Americans emanated from the stereotyped perceptions of the indigenous people as merciless Indian savages. As they are described in the United States Declaration of Independence, Sam Wolfson of The Guardian writes that the Declaration's passage has often been cited as an encapsulation of the dehumanizing attitudes toward indigenous Americas that the US was founded on. In an 1890 article about colonial expansion onto Native American land, author L. Frank Baum wrote that the whites, by law of conquest, by justice of civilization, are masters of the American continent, and the best safety of the frontier settlements will be secured by the total annihilations of the few remaining Indians. Attitudes of black supremacy, Arab supremacy, and East Asian supremacy also exist. Symbolic or modern. Some scholars argue that in the US, earlier violent and aggressive forms of racism have evolved into a more subtle form of prejudice in the late 20th century. This new form of racism is sometimes referred to as a modern racism, and it is characterized by outwardly acting unprejudiced while inwardly maintaining prejudiced attitudes, displaying subtle prejudiced behaviors such as actions informed by attributing equalities to others based on racial stereotypes and evaluating the same behavior differently based on the race of the person being evaluated. This view is based on studies of prejudice and discriminatory behavior, where some people will act ambivalently towards black people, with positive reactions in certain, more public contexts, but more negative views and expressions in more private contexts. This ambivalence may also be visible, for example, in hiring decisions where job candidates that are otherwise positively evaluated may be unconsciously disfavored by employers in the final decision because of their race. Some scholars consider modern racism to be characterized by an explicit rejection of stereotypes, combined with resistance to changing structures of discrimination for reasons that are ostensibly non-racial, an ideology that considers opportunity at a purely individual basis, denying the relevance of race in determining individual opportunities and the exhibition of indirect forms of microaggression toward and or avoidance of people of other races. Subconscious biases. Recent research has shown that individuals who consciously claim to reject racism may still exhibit race-based subconscious biases in their decision-making process. While such subconscious racial biases do not fully fit the definition of racism, their impact can be similar, though typically less pronounced, not being explicit, conscious, or deliberate. International law and racial discrimination. In 1919, a proposal to include a racial equality provision in the Covenant of the League of Nations was supported by a majority, but not adopted in the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. In 1943, Japan and its allies declared work for the abolition of racial discrimination to be their aim at the Greatest East Asia Conference. Article 1 of the 1945 UN Charter includes promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, as the UN proposed. In 1950, UNESCO suggests in the race question a statement signed by 21 scholars such as Ashley Montagu, Claudia Levi-Strauss, Gunnar Myrdal, Julian Huxley, and the others to drop the term race altogether and instead speak of ethnic groups. The statement condemned scientific racism theories that have played a role in the Holocaust. It aimed both at debunking scientific racist theories by popularizing modern knowledge concerning the race question, and morally condemned racism as contrary to the philosophy of the Enlightenment and its assumption of equal rights for all, along with Myrdal's An American Dilemma, The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy in 1944. The race question influenced the 1945 U.S. Supreme Court desegregation decision in Brown v. Board of Education. Also in 1950, the European Convention on Human Rights was adopted, which was widely used on racial discrimination issues. The United Nations used the definition of racial discrimination laid out in the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, adopted in 1966. Any distinctions, exclusion, restriction or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin that has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economical, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. Part 1 of Article 1 of the UN International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. In 2001, the European Union explicitly banned racism, along with many other forms of social discrimination. In the Chapter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, the legal effects of which, if any, would necessarily be limited to institutions of the European Union. Article 21 of the Charter prohibits discrimination on any grounds such as race, color, ethnic, or social origin, genetic features, language, religion or belief, political or any other opinion, membership of a national minority, property, disability, age or sexual orientation, and also discrimination on the grounds of nationality. Ideology. Racism is existed during the 19th century as a scientific racism, which attempted to provide a racial classification of humanity. In 1775, Johann Blumenbach divided the world's population into 5 groups according to skin color: Caucasians, Mongols, and the others. Positing the view that the non-Caucasians had arisen through a process of degeneration. Another early view in scientific racism was the polygynist view, which held that the different races had been separately created. Polygynist Christoph Meiners, for example, split mankind into 2 divisions which he labeled the beautiful white race and the ugly black race. In Meiners' book, The Outline of History of Mankind, he claimed that a main characteristic of race is either beauty or ugliness. He viewed only the white race as beautiful. He considered ugly races to be inferior, immoral, and animal-like. Anders Retzius demonstrated that neither Europeans nor others are one pure race, but of mixed origins, while discredited the derivations of Blumenbach's taxonomy are still widely used for the classification of the population in the United States. Hans-Peter Stinsby, while strongly emphasizing that all humans today are of mixed origins, in 1907 claimed that the origins of human difference must be traced extraordinarily far back in time, and conjectured that the purest race today would be an Australian Aboriginals. Scientific racism fell strongly out of favor in early 20th century, but the origins of fundamental human and societal differences are still researched within academia. In fields such as human genetics, including phylogenetics, social anthropology, comparative politics, history of religions, history of ideas, prehistory, history, ethnics, and psychiatry, there is a widespread rejection of any methodology based on anything similar to Blumenbach's races. It is more unclear to which extent and when ethnic and national stereotypes are accepted. Although, after World War II and the Holocaust, racist ideologies were discredited on ethnical, political, and scientific grounds. Racism and racial discrimination have remained widespread around the world. Du Bois observed that this is not so much race that we think about, but culture. A common history, common laws and religion, similar habits of thought, and a conscious striving together for certain ideals of life. Late 19th century nationalists were the first to embrace contemporary discourse on race, ethnicity, and survival of the fittest to shape new nationalist doctrines. Ultimately, race came to represent not only the most important traits of the human body, but was also regarded as decisively shaping the character and personality of the nation. According to this view, culture is the physical manifestation created by ethnic groupings, as such fully determined by racial, address, and advertised. Including characteristic. Pureness of race tended to be related to rather superficial characters that were easily addressed and advertised, such as blondness. Racial equalities tended to be related to nationality and language rather than the actual geographic distribution of racial characteristics. In the case of Nordicism, the denomination Germanic was equivalent to superiority of race, bolstered by some nationalist and ethnocentric values and achievements of choice. The concept of racial superiority evolved to distinguish from other cultures that were considered inferior or impure. This emphasis on cultural corresponds to the modern mainstream definition of racism. Racism does not originate from the existence of races. It creates them through a process of social division into categories. Anybody can be racialized independently of their somatic, cultural, religious differences. The definition explicitly ignores the biological concept of race, which is still subject to scientific debate. In the words of David C. Rowe, a racial concept, although sometimes the use of another name, will remain the user in biology and in other fields because scientists as well diversity, some of which is captured by race. Scientists as well as a layperson are fascinated by human diversity, some of which is captured by race. Racial prejudice becomes subject to international legislation. For instance, the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on November 20 in 1963, addresses racial prejudice explicitly next to discrimination for reason of race, color, or ethnic origin in Article 1. Ethnicity and ethnic conflicts. Debates over the origins of racism often suffer from a lack of clarity over the term. Many use the term racism to refer to more general phenomena such as xenophobia and ethnocentrism. Although scholars attempt to clearly distinguish those phenomena from racism as an ideology or from scientific racism, which was little to do with ordinary xenophobia. Others conflate recent form of racism with earlier forms of ethnic and national conflict. In most cases, ethno-national conflict seems to owe itself to conflict over land and strategic resources. In some cases, ethnicity and nationalism were harnessed in order to rally combatants in wars between great religious empires, for example the Muslim Turks and the Catholic Austro-Hungarians. Notions of race and racism have often played central roles in ethnic conflicts. Throughout history, when as an adversary is identified as other based on notions of race or ethnicity, in particular when other is interpreted to mean inferior. The means employed by the self-presumed superior party to appropriate territory, human chattel, or material wealth often have been more ruthless, more brutal, and less constrained by moral or ethical considerations. According to historian Daniel Richter, Pontiac's rebellion saw the emergence on both sides of the conflict of the novel idea that all native people were Indians, that all Euro-Americans were whites, and that all on one side must unite to destroy the other. Bastille states in his documentary, Africa different but equal. that racism, in fact, only just recently surfaced as late as in the 19th century due to the need for a justification of for slavery in America's history. Historically, racism was a major driving force behind the transatlantic slave trade. It was also a major force behind racial segregation, especially in the United States in the 19th and early 20th century and South Africa under apartheid. 19th and 20th century racism in the Western world is particularly well documented and constitutes a reference point in studies and discourses about racism. Racism has played a role in genocides such as the Armenian genocides and the Holocaust. The colonial projects like the European colonization of the American, African, Asia, indigenous people have been and are often subject to racist attitudes. Practice and ideologies of racism are condemned by the United Nations and the Declarations of Human Rights. Ethnic and racial nationalism. After the Napoleonic Wars, Europe was confronted with the new nationalities questions, leading to reconfigurations of a European map on which of the frontiers between the states have been delineated during the 1648 Peace of Westphalia. Nationalism had made its first appearance with the invention of the levy and masse by the French revolutionaries, thus inventing mass conscription in order to be able to defend the newly founded republic against ancient regime order represented by the European monarchies. This led to the French Revolutionary Nations. This led to the French Revolutionary Wars in 1792 until 1802, and then to the conquest of Napoleon, and the subsequent European-wide debates on the concept and realities of nations, and in particular of nation-states. The Westphalia Treaty had divided Europe into various empires and kingdoms, such as the Ottoman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the Swedish Empire, the Kingdom of France, and others. And for centuries, war were waged between princes, or Kabinettskrieg in German. Modern nation-states appeared in the wake of the French Revolution with the formation of patriotic sentiments for the first time in Spain. During the Peninsular War in 1808 and 1813, known in Spain as the Independence War, despite the restoration of the previous order with the 1815 Congress of Vienna, the nationalities question became the main problem of Europe during the Industrial Era, leading in particular of the 1848 revolutions and the Italian unification completed during 1871 Franco-Prussian War, which itself culminated in the proclamations of in German empires in the Hall of Mirrors and in the Palace of Versailles, thus achieving the German unification. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, was confronted with endless nationalist movements, which, along with the dissolving of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, would lead to the creation after World War I of the various nation-states of the Balkans, which national minorities in their borders. Ethnic nationalism, which advocated the belief in a hereditary membership of the nations, made its appearance in the historical context surrounding the creation of the modern nation-states. One of its main influences was the Romantic nationalist movement at the turn of the 19th century, represented by figures such as Johann Herder in 1744 until 1803. Johann Fichte in 1762 until 1814, in their address to the German nation in 1808, Friedrich Hegel in 1717 until 1831, or also in France, Jules Michelet in 1798 until 1874, was opposed to liberal nationalism, represented by authors such as Ernest Renan in 1823 until 1892, who conceived of the nation as a community, which instead of being based on the folk ethnic group and on a specific common language, was founded on a subjective will to live together. The nation is a daily plebiscite, 1882, or also John Stuart Mill in 1806 until 1873. Ethnic nationalism blended with scientific racist discourse as well as with continental imperialist Hannah Arendt in 1951. Discourses, for example, in the Pan-Germanism discourses, which postulated the racial superiority of German people of Volk. The Pan-German League, Aldischer Verband, created in 1891, promoted German imperialism and racial hygiene, and was opposed to intermarriage with Jews. Another popular current, the Volkisch movement, was also an important proponent of the German ethnic nationalist discourse, and it combined Pan-Germanism with modern racial anti-Semitism. Members of the Volkisch movement, in particular the Thule Society, would participate in the founding of the German Workers' Party, or DAP, in Munich in 1918, the predecessor of the Nazi Party. Pan-Germanism played a decisive role in the interwar period of the 1920s until 1930s. Okay, maybe just until that point, because it has been an hour, so you must be start getting bored. So after this, we may continue to the next topic, the second topic that I will tell you in the next stage, in the next in the next level. Okay, so just that for the first topic. I hope I don't get you bored, but if you're bored, then it's okay. It's your problems, it's your issues, not mine. But thank you for listening, for your attentions in this video. I hope you can get educated by me for just reading the articles in the Wikipedia about racism. Thank you so much. See you on the next topic. Peace out. So hello guys, welcome back to another the second section of the English Maker project. So as you can see in the screen, today in this chance I wanna educate you more about bullying. The second topic will be bullying. Okay, so as you guys know, the bullying is like abusive or discrimination in school generally, but a lot of people still normalize bullying as a behavior, but it is a bad behavior, right? So I'm here trying to educate you or trying to give you information more about bullying. So let's just get started. So what is the definition of bullying? So bullying is the use of force, coercion, hurtful teasing or threat to abuse, aggressively dominate or intimidate. The behavior is often repeated and habitual, One essential prerequisite is the perception by the bully or by the others of an imbalance of physical or social power. This imbalance distinguishes bullying from conflict. Bullying is a subcategory of aggressive behavior characterized by the following three criteria. First one, hostile intent. The second one is imbalance of power. And the third one, the last, is repetition over a period of time. Bullying is the activity of repeated, aggressive behavior intended to hurt another individual physically, mentally, or emotionally. Bullying ranges from one-on-one individual bullying through to group bullying called mobbing, in which the bully may have one or more lieutenants who are willing to assist the primary bully in their bullying activities. Sorry, not feeling well today. Bullying in school and the workplace is also referred to as peer abuse. Robert W. Fuller has analyzed bullying in the context of rankism. The Swedish-Norwegian researcher Dan Alves says bullying occurs when a person is exposed repeatedly and over time to negative actions on the part of one or more other persons, and that negative action occur when a person intentionally inflicts injury or discomfort upon another person through physical contact, through words, or in other ways. Individual bullying is usually characterized by a person behaving in a certain way to gain power over another person. A bullying culture can develop in any context in which humans interact with each other. This may include school, family, the workplace, the home, and the neighborhoods. The main platform for bullying in contemporary culture is on social media websites. In a 2012 study of male adolescent American football players, the strongest predictor of bullying was the perception of whether the most influential male in a player's life would approve of the bullying behavior. A study by the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health in 2019 showed a relationship between social media used by girls and increase in their exposure to bullying. Bullying may be defined in many different ways. In the United Kingdom or UK, there's no legal definition of bullying, while some states in the United States have laws against it. Bullying is divided into four basic types of abuse. First one is psychological, sometimes called emotional or relational. Second one is verbal, the third one is physical, and the last one is cyber. Behavior used to assert such domination may include physical assault or coercion, verbal harassment or threat, and such acts may be directed repeatedly toward particular targets. Rationalization of such behavior sometimes include differences of social class, race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, appearance, behavior, body language, personality, reputation, lineage, strength, size, or ability. If bullying is done by a group, it is called mobbing. So the etymology, the word bully was first used in the 1530s, meaning sweetheart, applied to either sex from the Dutch bol lover brother, probably diminutive of Middle High German bull brother, of uncertain origins compared with the German bull lover. The meaning deteriorated through the 17th century through fine fellow, blusterer to harasser of the weak. This may have been a connecting sense between lover and a ruffian as in a protector of a prostitute, which was one sense of bully, though not specifically attested until 1706. The verb to bully is first attested in 1710. In the past, in American culture, the term has been used differently. as an exclamation or exhortation, in particular famously associated with Theodore Roosevelt and continuing to the present in the bully pulpit. Roosevelt's coining and also as feigned or deprecating praise. Bully for him. Types. Bullying has been classified by the body of literal into different types. This can be in the form of nonverbal, verbal, or physical behavior. Another classification is based on perpetrators or the participant involved, so that the types include individual and collective bullying. Other interpretations also cite emotional and relational bullying in addition to physical harm inflicted towards another person or even property. This is also the case of the more recent phenomenon called cyberbullying. Physical, verbal, and relational bullying are most prevalent in primary school and could also begin much earlier while continuing into later stages in individual lives. Individual. First one, individual bullying tactics are perpetrated by a single person against a victim or victims. Individual bullying can be classified into four types outlined below. The first one is physical. Physical bullying is any bullying that hurts someone's body or damage their possessions. Stealing, shoving, hitting, fighting, and intentionally destroying someone's property are types of physical bullying. Physical bullying is rarely the first form of bullying that a victim will experience. Often, bullying will begin in a different form and later progress to physical violence. In physical bullying, the main weapon the bully uses is his or her body, or some part thereof, or an object as a weapon when attacking his or her victim. Sometimes, a group of young adults will target and alienate a peer because of some adolescent prejudice. This can quickly lead to a situation where they are being taunted, tortured, and beaten up by their classmates. Physical bullying will often escalate over time and can lead to detrimental or fatal ending, and therefore many try to stop it quickly to prevent any further escalation. Second one is verbal bullying. Verbal bullying is one of the most common types of bullying. This is any bullying that is conducted by speaking, either use of the voice or some form of body languages, and does not involve any physical contact. Bullying usually begins at this stage and includes any of the following: the derogatory name calling and nicknaming, and then spreading rumors of lying about someone, threatening someone, yelling at or talking to someone in a rude or unkind tone of voice, especially without justifiable cause, mocking someone's voice or style of speaking, laughing at someone, use of body language such as the middle finger to torture someone, making insults or otherwise making fun of someone. In verbal bullying, the main weapon the bully uses is voice. In many cases, verbal bullying is common in both genders, but girls are more likely to perform it. Girls, in general, are more subtle with insults than boys. Girls use verbal bullying as well as the social exclusion techniques to dominate and control other individuals and show their superiority and power, often to try to impress someone they idolize. However, there are also many boys with subtlety enough to use verbal techniques for domination, and who are practicing using words when they want to avoid the trouble that could come with physical bullying someone else. The third one is relational. Relational bullying, sometimes referred to as a social aggression, is a type of bullying
that uses relationship to hurt others. The term also denotes any bullying that is done with the intent to hurt somebody's reputation or social standing, which can also link in with the techniques included in physical and verbal bullying. Relational bullying is a form of bullying. The intent common Relational bullying is a form of bullying common among youth, but particularly upon girls. Social exclusion, slighting, or making someone feel left out is one of the most common types of relational bullying. Relational bullying can be used as a tool by bullies to both improve their social standing and control others. Unlike physical bullying, which is obvious, relational bullying is not overt and can continue for a long time without being noticed. Fourth one is cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is the use of technology to harass, threaten, embarrass, or target another person. When an adult is involved, it may meet the definition of cyber harassment or cyber stalking, a crime that can have legal consequences and involve jail time. This includes bullying by use of email, instant messaging, social media websites such as Facebook and the other stuffs, text messages, and cell phones. It is stated that cyberbullying is more common in secondary school than in primary school. The last one is collective. No, it's not the last one yet. Sorry. The fifth one is collective. Collective bullying tactics are employed when more than one individual against a victim or victims. Collective bullying is known as mobbing and can include any of the individual types of bullying. Trolling behavior on social media, although generally assumed to be an individual in nature by the casual reader, is sometimes organized efforts by sponsored astroturfers. The last one is mobbing. Mobbing refers to the bullying of an individual by a group in any context, such as a family, peer group, school, workplace, neighborhood, community, or online. When it occurs as emotional abuse in the workplace, such as ganging up by coworkers, subordinates, or superiors to force someone out of workplace through rumor, innuendo, intimidation, humiliation, discrediting, and isolation. It is also referred to as malicious, non-sexual, non-racial or racial, or general harassment. The characteristic. So the next point is the characteristic of the bullying or the bullies. So of bullies and accomplices, studies have shown that envy had envy and resentment may be motivates for bullying. Motives for bullying. Research on the self-esteem of bullies has produced equivocal results. While some bullies are arrogant and narcissistic, they can also use bullying as a tool to conceal shame or anxiety or to boost self-esteem by demeaning others. The abuser feels empowered. Bullies may bully out of jealousy or because they themselves are bullied. Psychologist Roy Baumeister observed that people who are prone to abusive behavior tend to have inflated but fragile egos because they think too highly of themselves. They are frequently offended by the criticism and lack of difference of other people and react to this disrespect with violence and insults. Researchers have identified other risk factors such as depression and personality disorders, as well as quickness to anger and use of force addiction to aggressive behaviors, mistaking others' actions as hostile, concern with preserving self-image, and engaging in obsessive of rigid actions. A combination of these factors may also be cause of this behavior. In one study of youth, a combination of antisocial traits and depression was found to be the best predictor of youth violence. Whereas video game violence and television violence exposure were not predictive of these behaviors, bullying may also result from a genetic predisposition or a brain abnormality in the bully. While parents can help a toddler develop emotional regulation and control to restrict aggressive behavior, some children fail to develop these skills due to insecure attachment with their family. Ineffective discipline and environmental factors such as a stressful home life and hostile siblings. Moreover, according to some researchers, bullies may be inclined towards negativity and perform poorly academically. Dr. Cook says a typical bully has trouble resolving problems with others and also has trouble academically. He or she usually has negative attitudes and beliefs about others, feels negatively toward himself or herself, comes from a family environment characterized by conflict and poor parenting, perceives school as a negative and is negatively influenced by peers. Contrarily, some researchers have suggested that some bullies are psychologically strongest and have high social standing among their peers, while their targets are emotionally distressed and socially marginalized. Peer groups often promote the bully's action, and members of these peer groups also engage in behaviors such as mocking, excluding, punching, and insulting one another as a source of entertainment. Sadly, other researchers also argue that a minority of the bullies, those who are not in turn bullied, enjoy going to school and are least likely to take days off sick. Research indicates that adults who bully have authoritarian personalities combined with a strong need to control or dominate. It has also been suggested that a prejudicial view of subordinates can be a particularly strong risk factor. In a recent study, bullies showed lower school performance-related self-esteem than non-involved students. They also showed higher social self-esteem than victims of traditional bullying. Brain studies have shown that the section of the brain associated with reward becomes active when bullies are shown a video of someone inflicting pain on another. Of typical bystanders. Often, bullying takes place in the presence of a large group of relative, uninvolved bystanders. In many cases, it is the bully's ability to create the illusion they have the support of the majority present that instills the fear of speaking out. In protestation of the bullying activities being observed by the group, unless the bully mentality is effectively challenged in any given group in its early stages, it often becomes an accepted or supported norm within the group. Unless action is taken, a culture of bullying is often perpetuated within a group for months, years, or longer. Bystanders who have been able to establish their own friendship group or support group have been found to be far more likely to opt to speak out against bullying behavior than those who have not. In addition to communication of clear expectation that bystanders should intervene and increasing individual self-efficacy, there is growing research to suggest intervention should among adults. Being a bystander to workplace bullying was linked to depression. Sorry, let's continue. Of victims, Dr. Cook says a typical victim is likely to be aggressive, lack social skills, think negative thoughts, experience difficulties in solving social problems come from a negative family, school, community environment, and be noticeably rejected and isolated by peers. Victims often have characteristics such as being physically and mentally weak, as well as being easily distraught emotionally. They may also have physical characteristics that make them easier targets for bullies, such as being overweight or having some type of physical deformity. Boys more likely Boys are more likely to be victims of physical bullying, while girls are more likely to be bullied indirectly. Low levels of self-esteem has been identified as a frequent antecedent of bullying victimization. Victims of traditional bullying tend to have lower global, social, body-related, and emotional self-esteem compared to uninvolved students. Victims of cyberbullying, on the other hand, may not have lower self-esteem scores than uninvolved students but might have higher body-related self-esteem than both victims of traditional bullying and bullies. The results of a meta-analysis conducted by Cook and published by the American Psychological Association in 2010 concluded the main risk vectors for children and adolescents being bullied and also for becoming bullies are the lack of social problem-solving skills. Children who are bullied often show physical or emotional signs, such as being afraid to attend school, complaining of headache or a loss of appetite, a lack of interest in school activities, spending time with friends or family, reluctant to go out in public for fear they may encounter their bullies in public places other than school, and having an overall sense of sadness. The effects. So what is the effect of the bullying? Mona Moore of the Anti-Bullying Centre at Trinity College in Dublin has written there's a growing body of research which indicates that individuals, whether child or adult, who are persistently subjected to abusive behavior are at risk of stress-related illness, which can sometimes lead to suicide. Excuse me. Those who have been targets of bullying can suffer from long-term emotional and behavioral problems. Bullying can cause loneliness, depression, anxiety, lead to low self-esteem, and increase susceptibility to illness. Bullying has also been shown to cause maladjustment in young children, and targets of bullying, who are also bullies themselves, exhibit even greater social difficulties. A mental health report also found that bullying was linked to eating disorders, anxiety, body dysmorphia, and other negative psychological effects. Both victims and perpetrators have been shown to exhibit higher levels of loneliness. So the first effect is suicide. Even though there's evidence that bullying increases the risk of suicide, bullying alone does not cause suicide. Depression is one of the main reasons why kids who are bullied die by suicide. It is estimated that between 15 and 25 children die by suicide every year in the UK alone because they are being bullied. Certain groups seem to incur a higher risk for suicide, such as Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, Asian Americans, and LGBT people. When someone feels unsupported by family or friends, it can make the situation much worse for the victim. In a self-report study completed in New York by 9th through 12th graders, victims of bullying reported more depressive symptoms and psychological distress than those who did not experience bullying. All types of involvement in bullying among both boys and girls is associated with depression even a couple years later. Another study that followed up with Finnish teens 2 years After the initial survey showed that depression and suicidal ideation is higher with teens who are bullied than those who did not report experiencing bullying. A Dutch longitudinal study on elementary students reported that boys who are bully victims, who play both roles of a victim and a bully, were more likely to experience depression or serious suicidal ideation than the other roles, victims or bullies only, while girls who have any involvement in bullying have a higher level risk of depression. In a report in a study of high school students completed in Boston, students who self-reported being victims or bullying were more likely to consider suicide when compared to youth who did not report being bullied. The same study also showed a high risk of suicidal consideration in youth who report being a perpetrator, victim, or victim perpetrator. Victims and victim bullies are associated with a high risk of suicidal attempts. The place where youth live also appears to differentiate their bullying experience such that those living in more urban areas who reported both being bullied and bullying other appear to show high risk of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. A national survey given to American 6th through 10th grade students found that cyberbullying victims experience a higher level of depression than victims experience other forms of bullying. This can be related to the anonymity behind social media. If a teen is being bullied and it's displaying symptoms of depression should be questioned and interventions should be implemented. The Danish studies showed that kids who are bullied talked to their parents and teacher about it, and some reported a decrease in bullying or stopped the bullying after teacher or parent intervened. The study emphasized the importance of implementing program collaboration with schools to have programs and anti-bullying interventions in place to prevent and properly intervene when it occurs. The study also shows the importance of having parents and teachers talk to the bullies about their bullying behavior in order to provide the necessary support for those experiencing bullying. While some people find it very easy to ignore a bully, others may find it very difficult and reach a breaking point. There have been cases of apparent bullying suicides that have been reported closely by the media. These include the deaths of Ryan Halligan, Phoebe Prince, Dawn Mary Wesley, Nicola Ann Raphael, Megan Mayer, Audrey Pott, Tyler Clementi, Jamie Rodemayer, Kenneth Weshun, Jaden Bell, Kelly Yeomans, Rete Parsons, Amanda Todd, Brody Panlock, Jessica Haffer, Hamad Nastos, Slajana Vidovic, April Himes, Cherise Morales, and Rebecca Ann Sedgwick. According to the Suicide Awareness Voice for the Education, suicide is one of the leading causes of death for youth from 15 to 24 years old. Over 16% of students seriously consider suicide. 13% create a plan, and 8% have made a serious attempt. Damn. Next point is positive development. Some have argued that bullying can teach life lessons and still instill strength. Helen Gilbert, a child development academic, sparked controversy when she argued that being a target of bullying can teach a child how to manage disputes and boost their ability to interact with others. No, goddamn no. And that teachers should not intervene but leave children to respond to the bullying themselves. Damn. Teaching of such anti-bullying coping skills to would-be targets and the others has been found to be an effective long-term means of reducing bullying incidence rates and a valuable skill set for individuals. The hormonal. Statistically, controlling for age and pubertal status results indicated that on average verbally bullied girls produce less testosterone, and verbally bullied boys produce more testosterone than their non-bullied counterparts. Dark Triad. Research on the Dark Triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy indicate a correlation with bullying as part of evidence of the aversive nature of those traits. Projections. A bully may project his or her own feelings of vulnerability onto the targets of the bullying activity, despite that the fact that a bully's typically denigrating activities are aimed at the bully's targets. The true source of such negativity is ultimately almost always found in the bully's own sense of personal insecurity and or vulnerability. Such aggressive projections of displays negative emotions can occur anywhere from the micro level of interpersonal relationships all the way up through the macro level of international politics or even international armed conflicts. This is the important one. Emotional intelligence. Bullying is an abusive social interaction between peers which can include aggression, harassment, and violence. Bullying is typically repetitive and enacted by those who are in a position of power over the victim. A growing body of research illustrates a significant relationship between bullying and emotional intelligence. Mayer et al. On 208 defines the dimensions of overall EI as accurately perceiving emotion, using emotions to facilitate thought, understanding emotion, and managing emotion. The concept combines emotional and intellectual process. Lower emotional intelligence appears to be related to involvement in bullying as the bully and or the victim of bullying. EI seems to play an important role in both bullying behavior and victimization in bullying. Given that EI is illustrated to be malleable, EI education could greatly improve bullying prevention and intervention initiatives. The next point is context. Cyberbullying. It has been noted that disabled people are disproportionately affected by bullying and abuse, and such activity has been cited as a hate crime. The bullying is not limited to those who are visibly disabled, such as wheelchair users or physically deformed, such as those with a cleft lip, but also those with learning disabilities, such as autism and a developmental coordination disorder. There is an additional problem that those with learning disabilities are often not as able to explain things to other people, so are more likely to be disbelieved or ignored if they do complain. Next one is gay bullying. What? Gay bullying and gay bashing designated direct or indirect verbal or physical actions by a person or group against someone who is gay or lesbian, or perceived to be so due to rumors or because they are considered to fit gay stereotypes. Gay and lesbian youth are more likely than straight youth to report bullying as well as be bullied. The legal bullying. The legal bullying is the bringing of a vexatious legal action to control and punish a person. Legal bullying can often take the form of frivolous, repetitive, or burdensome lawsuits to brought to intimidate the defendant into submitting to the litigant's request, not because of the legal merit of the litigant's position, but principally due to the defendant's inability to maintain the legal battle. This can also take the form of strategic lawsuit against public participation, or SLAPP, SLAP. It was partially concerned about the potential for this kind of abuse that helped to fuel the protests against SOPA, and PIPA, PIPA in the United States in 2011-2012. The military bullying. In 2000, the UK Ministry of Defence (MOD) defined bullying as the use of physical strength or the abuse of authority to intimidate or victimize others, or to give an unlawful punishment. Some argue that this behavior should be allowed due to ways in which soldiering is different from other occupations. Soldiers expected to risk their lives should, according to them, develop strength of body and spirit to accept bullying. Parental bullying of children. Parents who may display their anger, insecurity, or a persistent need to dominate and control upon their children in excessive ways have been proven to increase the likelihood that their own children will in turn become overly aggressive or controlling towards their peers. The American Psychological Association, or APA, advised on its website that parents who may suspect their own children may be engaging in bullying activities among their peers should carefully consider the examples which they themselves may be setting for their own children regarding how they typically interact with their own peers, colleagues, and children. Prison bullying. The prison environment is known for bullying. An additional complication is the staff and their relationship with the inmates. Thus, the following possible bullying scenarios are possible. The point is, inmate bullies inmate, or echoing school bullying. Staff bullies inmate, staff bullies staff, and the manifestation of workplace bullying, and inmate bullies staff. School bullying. Bullying of a student students in schools. Bullying can occur in nearly any part of in or around the school building, although it may occur more frequently during physical education classes and activities such as recess. Bullying also takes place in school hallways, bathrooms, on school buses, and while waiting for buses, and in cases that require group work and/or after-school activities. Bullying in school sometimes consists of a group of students taking advantage of or isolating one student in particular and gaining the loyalty of bystanders who want to avoid becoming the next target. In the 2011 documentary Bully, we see firsthand the torture that kids go through both in schools and while the school bus. As the movie follows around a few kids, we see how bullying affects them both at school as well as in their homes. While bullying has no age limit, these bullies may taunt and tease their target before finally physically bullying them. Bystanders typically choose to either participate or watch, sometimes out of fear of becoming the next target. Bullying can also be perpetrated by teachers and the school system itself. There is an inherent power differential in the system that can easily predispose to subtle or covert abuse, relational aggression or passive aggression, humiliation or exclusion, even while maintaining overt commitments to anti-bullying policies. In 2016, in Canada, a North American legal precedent was set by a mother and her son. After the son was bullied in his public school, the mother and son won a court case against the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, making this the first case in North America where the school board has been found negligent in a bullying case for failing to meet the standard of care. The duty of care that the school board owes to its students.
Thus, it sets a precedent of a school board being found liable in negligence for harm caused to a child because they failed to protect a child from the bullying actions of other students. There has been only one other similar bullying case, and it was one in Australia in 2013, Oyston v. St. Patrick's College, 2013. The sexual bullying. The sexual bullying is any bullying behavior, whether physical or non-physical, that is based on a person's sexuality or gender. It, it is when sexuality or gender is used by a weapon by boys or girls towards other boys or girls. Although it is more commonly directed at girls, it can be carried out to a person's face, behind their back, or through the use of technology. Transbullying or transbashing is the act of victimizing a person physically, sexually, or verbally because they are transgender or transsexual. Unlike gay bashing, it is committed because of the target's actual or perceived gender identity, not sexual orientation. Workplace bullying. Workplace bullying occurs when an employee experiences a persistent pattern of mistreatment from others in the workplace that cause harm. Workplace bullying can include such tactics as verbal bullies, nonverbal, psychological, physical abuse, and humiliation. This type of workplace aggression is particularly difficult because, unlike typical forms of school bullying, workplace bullies often operate within the established rules and policies of their organization and their society. Bullying in the workplace is in the majority of cases reported as having been perpetrated by someone in authority over the target. However, bullies can also be peers and occasionally can be subordinates. The first known-documented use of workplace bullying is in 1992 in a book made by Andrea Adams called Bullying at Work: How to Confront and Overcome It. Research has also investigated the impact of the larger organizational context on bullying as well as the group level processes, the impact on the incidence and maintenance of bullying behavior. Bullying can be covert or overt and may be missed by superiors or known by many throughout the organization. Negative effects are not limited to the targeted individuals and may lead to a decline in employee morale and change in organizational culture. The Cochrane Collaboration Systematic Review has found very low quality evidence to suggest that organizational and individual interventions may prevent bullying behaviors in the workplace. In academia, bullying in academia is a workplace bullying of scholars and staffs in academia, especially places of higher education such as colleges and universities. It is believed to be common, although has not received as much attention from researchers as bullying in some other contexts. In blue-collar jobs, bullying has been identified as prominent in blue-collar jobs, including on oil rigs, in mechanic shops and machine shops. It is thought that intimidation and fear of retribution cause decreased incident reports. In industry sectors dominated by males, typically of little education, where disclosure of incidents is seen as effeminate. Reporting in the socio-economic and cultural milieu of such industries would likely lead to be a vicious circle. This is often used in combination with manipulation and coercion effects to gain favor among high-ranking administrators. In information technology, a culture of bullying is common in information technology or IT, leading to high sickness rates, low morale, poor productivity, and high staff turnover.
Deadline driven project work and stressed out managers take their toll on IT workers in the legal profession. Bullying in the legal profession is believed to be more common than some other professions. It is believed that its adversarial, hierarchical tradition contributes toward this. Women trainees and solicitors who have been qualified for 5 years or less are more impacted, as are ethnic minority lawyers and lesbian, gay, and bisexual lawyers. In medicine, even though the American Nurses Association or ANA believe that all nursing personnel have the right to work in safe, non-abusive environments, bullying has been identified as being particularly prevalent in the nursing profession, although the reasons are not clear. It is thought that relational aggression, physiological aspects of bullying such as gossiping and intimidation are relevant. Relational aggression has been studied among girls, but not so much among adult women. In teaching, school teachers are commonly the subject of bullying, but they are also sometimes the originators of bullying within a school environment. In other area, as the verb to bully is defined as simply forcing one's way, aggressively or by intimidation. The term may generally apply to any life experience where one is motivated primarily by intimidation instead of by more positive goals such as mutually shared interests and benefits. As such, any figure of authority or power who may use intimidation as a primary means of motivating others, such as neighborhood protection racket don, a national dictator, a childhood ringleader, a terrorist or a terrorist organization, or even a ruthless business CEO could rightfully be referred to as a bully. According to psychologist Pauline Renee Payton, we each face the possibility of being bullied in any phase of our lives. Machines. Children have been observed bullying anthropomorphic robots designed to assist the elderly. Their attack starts with blocking the robot's path of movement and then escalate to verbal abuse, hitting and destroying the objects. 75% of the kids interviewed perceived as robot as human-like, yet decided to abuse it anyway, while 35% of the kids who beat up the robot did so for enjoyment. Prevention. Many of you haven't noticed how to prevent the bullying in every environmental. So here's the prevention. Bullying prevention is a collective effort to prevent, reduce, and stop bullying. Many campaigns and events are designed to bullying prevention throughout the world. Bullying prevention campaigns and even include Anti-Bullying Day, Anti-Bullying Week, International Day of Pink, International Stand Up to Bullying Day, and National Bullying Prevention Month. Anti-bullying laws in the US have also been enacted in 23 of its 50 states, making bullying in schools illegal. Responding to bullying. Bullying is typically ongoing and not isolated behavior. Common ways that people try to respond are try to ignore it, to confront the bullies, or to turn to an authority figure to try to address it. Ignoring it often does nothing to stop bullying continuing, and it can become worse over time. It can be important to address bullying behavior early on, as it can be easier to control the earlier is detected. Bystanders play an important role in responding to bullying, as doing nothing can encourage it to continue, while small steps that oppose the behavior can reduce it. Authority figures can play an important role, such as parents in child or adolescent situations, or supervisors, human resources staff or parent bodies in workplace and volunteer settings. Authority figures can be influential in recognizing and stopping bullying behavior and creating an environment where it doesn't continue. In many situations, however, people acting as authority figures are untrained and unqualified, do not know how to respond, and can make the situation worse. In some cases, the authority figures even support the people doing the bullying, facilitating in continuing and increasing the isolation of marginalizing on target. Some of the most effective ways to respond are to recognize that harmful behavior is taking care and creating an environment where it won't continue. People who are being targeted have little control over which authority figures that they can turn to and how such matters will be addressed. However, one means of support is to find a counselor or psychologist who is trained in handling bullying. So yeah, that's just uh, what I can tell about the bullying topics, and also I'm here trying to educate you about what is bullying, the definition, the response, and then classification of the bullying, and also other stuffs about bullying. And the bullying has been a global issue from 19th century, as written in the articles. So I preference from Wikipedia. So there's a lot of types of bullying as well, as like uh, shown in the screen, and I've taught you there's a lot of types of bullying. Even there's a legal bullying, so it's not just a normal act, it's a global issues, in my opinion. So if you bully someone, you will, like I've shown in the screen, that it will cause suicidal or more. Yet it will cause the victims or the person who get bullied by their friends, oh no, they're bullied, the bullies is more likely to gain mental sickness or mental illness, that they are um, sad, or maybe getting mental illness, so that their mental is crashed, us, and then they doesn't want to tell this to someone, that they are getting bullied in the school or in the workplace or anywhere, and the family doesn't know his or her condition or the victim's condition, so that they doesn't know what is his issues, his problems, so that none of their family, the victim's family, none of them, no, if the victims doesn't tell that the bullying acts uh, to his or her family, it will not be prevent. It will always continue like that if the victims won't or doesn't want to tell the issues to their family, and it will also lead to suicidal acts if there's isn't any acts from family or teachers or from the environment. So if you have friends who are victims of the bullies anywhere it is, like in the school, in the workplace, in any condition, in any place, anywhere, just help them. If you know that they are being bullied at that time, don't afraid to tell the bully that they did wrong. What they did is wrong. So don't be afraid. If you get punched, then just take it. You will help, and you will gain trust from the victims that you are here to help him or her, so that the victims can feel more comfortable with you, so that the victims can tell his problems and can prevent from a suicidal acts. So yeah, and this is shown that how to prevent bullying. Okay, so you just, if you see any bullying acts or condition, just don't stand, because by just being a bystanders and won't do anything about it, yeah, you will get much problem. You will get sins for not helping each other. So just being a bystanders and do nothing. You being a sucks. You being a shit. So this is an issue, a big deal. So if you, for the last advice, if you see any victims that getting bullied by the bullies, just don't stand there and try to help the victims, even though you're getting punched or getting kicked or getting taunted or anything else. Just help the victims, okay? So that's it for the second topics, that is the bullying. If sorry if I made many mistakes, of course, because I'm still learning. So if there are any correction or there are any faults, please correct me in the comment section below. Please tell me. Yeah, just here for the second topics, that is bullying. Thank you. See you on the next topic. Hey, hello guys, and welcome back to the third topic. So here we're gonna start the third topic, which is the juvenile delinquency. So some of you may ask, what is the juvenile delinquency? So the juvenile delinquency generally means that some of the juvenile or young ages that want to turn to an adults, they just did something that for us is wrong, but for them it is a fun time. It is I know if for us or an adults or maybe a new adults, that's a bad behavior, but for the juvenile of delinquency, they did things for funny, for fun, and for finding joy. So without wasting any time, let's just continue to the third topic, and for the definition and the others. Okay, let's just continue. So the juvenile delinquency, also known as juvenile offending, is the act of participating in unlawful behavior as a minor or individual younger than the statutory age of majority. For example, in the United States of America, a juvenile delinquent is a person who is typically below 18, 17 in the states of Georgia, Michigan, Missouri, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Texas, and Wisconsin years of age, and commits an act that otherwise would have been charged as a crime if they were an adult. Juvenile crimes can range from status offenses such as underage smoking or drinking to property crimes and violent crimes. Some scholars have found an increase in arrests for youth and have concluded that this may reflect more aggressive criminal justice and zero-tolerance policies rather than changes in youth behavior. Youth violence rates in the United States have dropped to approximately 12% of peak rates in 1993, according to official US government statistics, suggesting that most juvenile offending is non-violent. Many delinquent acts can be attributed to the environmental factors such as family behavior or peer influence. One contributing factor that has gained attention in recent years is the school-to-prison pipeline. According to Diverse Education, nearly 75% of states have built more jails and prisons than colleges. CNN also provides a diagram that shows that cost per inmate is significantly higher in most states than cost per student. This shows that taxpayers' dollars are going toward providing for prisoners rather than providing for the educational system and promoting the advancement of education. For every school that is built, the focus on punitive punishment has been seen to correlate with juvenile delinquency rates. Some have suggested shifting from zero-tolerance policies to restorative justice approaches. Juvenile detention centers, courts, and electronic monitoring are common structures of the juvenile legal system. Juvenile courts are in place to address offenses for minors as civil rather than criminal cases in most instances. The frequency of use and structure of these courts in the United States varies by state. Depending on the type and severity of the offense committed, it is possible for people under 18 to be charged and treated as adults. Overview: the juvenile delinquency or offending is often separated into three categories. The first one is delinquency, crimes committed by minors which are dealt with by the
Juvenile courts and justice systems. The second one is criminal behavior. Crimes dealt with by the criminal justice systems. And the last one is status offenses. Offenses that are only classified as such because only a minor can commit them. One example of this is possession of alcohol by a minor. These offenses are also dealt with by the juvenile courts. Currently, there is not an agency whose jurisdiction is tracking worldwide juvenile delinquency, but UNICEF estimates that over 1 million children are in some type of detention globally. Many countries do not keep records of the amount of delinquent or detained minors, but of the ones that do. The United States has the highest number of juvenile delinquency cases. In the United States, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention compiles data concerning trends in juvenile delinquency. According to their most recent publication, 7 in 1,000 juveniles in the US committed a serious crime in 2016. A serious crime is defined by the US Department of Justice as one of the following 8 offenses: murder and negligent homicide, rape, legacy and revised, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, motor vehicle theft, larceny, theft, and arson. According to the research compiled by James Howell in 2009, the arrest rate for juveniles has been dropping consistently since its peak in 1994. Of the cases for juvenile delinquency that make it through the court system, probation is the most common consequence, and males account for over 70% of the caseloads. According to the developmental research by Moffitt in 2006, there are 2 different types of offenders that emerge in adolescence. The first is an age-specific offender, referred to as the adolescence limited offender, for whom juvenile offending or delinquency begins and ends during the period of adolescence. Moffitt argues that most teenagers tend to show some of antisocial or delinquent behavior during adolescence. It is therefore important to account for these behaviors in childhood in order to determine whether they will be adolescents, limited offenders, or something more long-term. The other type of offender is the repeat offender, referred to as the life course persistent offender, who begins offending or showing antisocial or aggressive behavior in adolescence or even childhood and continues into adulthood. Situational factors. Most of influencing factors for juvenile delinquency tend to be caused by a mix of both genetic and environmental factors. According to Lauren Steinberg's book Adolescence, the two largest predictors of juvenile delinquency are parenting style and peer group association. Additional factors that may lead a teenager into juvenile delinquency include poor or low socioeconomic status, poor school readiness or performance, and or failure and peer rejection. Delinquent activity, especially the involvement in youth gangs, may also be caused by a desire for protection against violence or financial hardship. Juvenile offenders can view delinquent activity as a means of gaining access to resources to protect against such threats. Research by Carrie Depp indicates that even changes in the weather can increase the likelihood of children exhibiting deviant behavior. The family environment. Family factors that may have an influence on offending include the level of parental supervision, the way parents discipline a child, parental conflict or separation, criminal activity by parents or siblings, parental abuse or neglect, and the quality of the parent-child relationship. As mentioned above, parenting style is one of the largest predictors of juvenile delinquency. There are four categories of parenting styles which describe the attitudes and behaviors that parents express through raising their children. Authoritative parenting is characterized by warmth and support in addition to discipline. Indulgent parenting is characterized by warmth and regard towards their children but lacks structure and discipline. Authoritarian parenting is characterized by high discipline without the warmth, thus leading to often hostile demeanor and harsh correction. Neglectful parenting is both non-responsive and non-demanding. The child is not engaged either affectionately or disciplinary by the parent. According to the research done by Laura E. Burke, the style of parenting that would be most beneficial for a child, based on studies conducted by Diana Baumrind in 1971, is the authoritative child rearing style because it combines acceptance with discipline to render healthy development for a child. As concluded in Steinberg's Adolescence, children brought up by single parents are more likely to live in poverty and engage in delinquent behavior than those who live with both parents. However, according to research done by Graham and Bowling, once the attachment a child feels towards their parents and level of parental supervision are taken into account, children in single-parent families are no more likely to offend than others. It was seen that when a child has low parental supervision, they are much more likely to offend. Negative peer group association is more likely when adolescents are left unsupervised. A lack of supervision is also connected to poor relationships between children and parents. Children who are often in conflict with their parents may be less willing to discuss their activities with them. Conflict between a child's parents is also much more closely linked to offending than being raised by a lone parent. Adolescents with siblings who have committed crimes are more likely to be influenced by their siblings and become delinquents if the sibling is older, of the same sex or gender, and maintains a good relationship with the child. Cases where younger criminal siblings influences an older one are rare. An aggressive, more hostile sibling is less likely to influence a younger sibling in the direction of delinquency. If anything, the more strained the relationship between the siblings, the less they will want to be influenced each other. Younger siblings in the direction of children resulting from unintended pregnancies are more likely to exhibit delinquent behavior. They also have lower mother-child relationship quality. The peer influence. Peer rejection in childhood is also a large predictor of juvenile delinquency. This rejection can affect the child's ability to be socialized properly and often leads them to gravitate towards antisocial peer groups. Association with antisocial groups often leads to the promotion of violent, aggressive, and deviant behavior. Robert Vargas, being in bad company, explains that adolescents who can choose between groups of friends are less susceptible to peer influence that could lead them to commit illegal acts. Aggressive adolescents who have been rejected by peers. Aggressive adolescents who has been rejected by peers are more likely to have a hostile attribution bias, which leads people to interpret the actions of others, whether they be hostile or not, as purposely hostile and aggressive towards them. This often leads to an impulsive and aggressive reaction. Conformity plays a significant role in the vast impact that peer group influence has on an individual. Aronson, Wilson, and Eckert in 2013 point to the research experiment conducted by Solomon Asch in 1956 to ascertain whether a group could influence an individual behavior. The experiment was executed by asking a participant to determine which line in the set of 3 lines matched the length of an original line.
Confederates knew the purpose of the experiment and were directed to answer questions incorrectly during certain phases of the experiment. These Confederates answered the questions before the participant. The Confederates answered the first few questions correctly, as did the participant. Eventually, all of the Confederates started to answer incorrectly. The purpose of the experiment was to see if the group would influence the participant to answer incorrectly, as found that 76% of the participants conformed and answered incorrectly when influenced by the group. According to these findings, it was concluded that a peer group that is involved in deviant behavior can influence an adolescent to engage in similar activities. Once the adolescents become part of the group, they will be susceptible to groupthink. School to prison pipeline. A common contributor to juvenile delinquency rates is a phenomenon referred to as the school to prison pipeline. In recent years, school disciplinary measures have become increasingly policed. In fact, 97% of high school students attend schools with police officers. This rise in police presence is often attributed to the implementation of zero-tolerance policies. Based on the broken windows theory of criminology and the Gun-Free Schools Act, zero-tolerance policies stressed the use of specific, consistent, and harsh punishment to deal with in-school infractions. Often measures such as suspension or expulsion are assigned to students who deviate regardless of the reason or past disciplinary history. This use of punishment often has been linked with increasingly high school dropout rates and future arrest. It was found in 2018 study that students who receive a suspension were less likely to graduate and more likely to be arrested or on probation. As stated in research by Matthew Theriot, the increased police presence in the school and use of tougher punishment methods lead student action to be criminalized and in turn revert to juvenile justice systems. The Center on Youth Justice at the Vera Institute of Justice found that for similar students attending similar school, as a single suspension or expulsion doubles the risk that a student will repeat a grade. Being retained a grade, especially while in the middle or high school, is one of the strongest predictors of dropping out. In a national longitudinal study, it was reported that youth with a prior suspension were 68% more likely to drop out of school. The school to prison pipeline disproportionately affects minority students, according to data compiled by the compiled by the United States Government Accountability Office. 39% of students who received a suspension in 2013 until 2014 school year were black. Even though black students accounted for only about 15% of public school students, this overrepresentation applied to both boys and girls of African descent. Compared to white students, black students were expelled or suspended 3 times as frequently. Personality factors. Juvenile delinquency is the unlawful activities by minors in their teen or preteen years. It is influenced by 4 main risk factors, namely personality, background, state of mind, and drugs. Gender. Gender is another risk factor in regards to influencing delinquent behavior. The predictors of different types of delinquency vary across females and males for various reasons. But a common underlying reason for this is socialization. Different predictors of delinquency emerge when analyzing distinct offending types across gender. But overall, it is evident that males commit more crimes than females. Across all offenses, females are less likely to be involved in delinquent acts than males. Females not only commit fewer offenses, but they also commit less serious offenses. Socialization plays a key role in the gender gap in delinquency because male and female juveniles are often socialized differently. Girls and boys' experiences are heavily mediated by gender, which alters their interactions in society. Males and females are differently controlled and bonded, suggesting that they will not make the same choices and may follow different paths of delinquency. Social bonds are important for both males and females, but different aspects of the bond are relevant for each gender. The degree of involvement in social settings is a significant predictor of males' violent delinquency, but is not significant for females. Males tend to be more connected with their peer relationship, which in effect has a stronger influence on their behavior. Association with delinquent peers is one of the strongest correlates of juvenile delinquency, and much of the gender gap can be accounted by the fact that males are more likely to have friends that support delinquent behavior. Delinquent peers are positively and significantly related to delinquency in males, but delinquent peers are negatively and insignificantly related to delinquents for females. As for females, familial functioning in relationships have shown to be more important. Female juveniles tend to be more strongly connected with their family. The disconnect or the lack of socialization between their family members can significantly predict their likelihood of committing crimes as juveniles and even as adults. When the family is disrupted, females are more likely to engage in delinquent behavior than males. Boys, however, tend to be less connected to their family and are not as affected by these relationships. When it comes to minor offenses such as fighting, vandalism, shoplifting, and the carrying of weapons, differences in gender are limited because they are most common among both males as well as females. Elements of the social bond, social disorganization, routine activities, opportunity, and attitudes towards violence are also related to delinquent behavior among both males and females. Neurological, individual psychological or behavioral risk factors that may make offending more likely include low intelligence, impulsiveness, or the inability to delay gratification, aggression, lack of empathy, and restlessness. Other risk factors that may be evident during childhood and adolescence include aggressive or troublesome behavior, language delays or impairments, lack of emotional control or learning to control one's anger, and cruelty to animals. Children with low intelligence are more likely to do badly in school. This may increase the chance of offending because low educational attainment, low attachment to school, and low educational aspirations are all risk factors for offending in themselves. Children who perform poorly at school are also more likely to be a truant, and the status of offense of truancy is linked to further offending. Impulsiveness is seen by some as the key aspect of a child's personality that predicts offending. However, it is not clear whether these aspects of personality are the results of deficits in the executive functions of the brain, or a result of parental influences or other social factors. In any event, studies of adolescent development show that teenagers are more prone to risk-taking, which may explain the high disproportionate rate of offending among adolescents. Psychological. Juvenile delinquents are often diagnosed with different disorders. Around 16% of male teens into
to 9% of female teens have a conduct disorder. This can vary from a positional deviant disorder, which is not necessarily aggressive, to antisocial personality disorder, often diagnosed among psychopaths. A conduct disorder can develop during childhood and then manifest itself during adolescence. Juvenile delinquents who have recurring encounters with the criminal justice system, or in other words, those who are life course persistent offenders, are sometimes diagnosed with conduct disorders because they show a continuous disregard of their own and others' safety and or property. Once the juvenile continues to exhibit the same behavioral patterns and turn 18, is then at risk of being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and much more, prone to become a serious criminal offender. One of the main components used in diagnosing an adult with antisocial personality disorder consists of presenting documented history of conduct disorder before the age of 15. These two personality disorders are analogous in their erratic and aggressive behavior. This is why habitual juvenile offenders diagnosed with conduct disorder are likely to exhibit signs of antisocial personality disorder early in life and then as they mature. Sometimes these juveniles reach maturation and they develop into career criminals or life course persistent offenders. Career criminals begin committing antisocial behavior before entering grade school and are versatile in that they engage in an array of destructive behaviors, offend at exceedingly high rates, and are less likely to quit committing crime as they age. Quantitative research was completed on 9,945 juvenile males offenders between the ages of 10 and 18 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the 1970s. The longitudinal birth cohort was used to examine a trend among a small percentage of career criminals who accounted for the largest percentage of crime activity. The trend exhibited a new phenomenon among habitual offenders. The phenomenon indicates that only 6% of the youth qualified under their definition of a habitual offender, known today as life course persistent offenders or career criminals, and yet were responsible for 52% of delinquency within the entire study. The same 6% of chronic offenders accounted for 71% of the murders and 69% of the aggravated assaults. This phenomenon was later researched among an adult population in 1977 and resulted in similar findings. SA Mednick did a birth cohort of 30,000 males and found that 1% of the males were responsible for more than half of the criminal activity. The habitual crime behavior found among juveniles is similar to that of adults. As stated before, most life course persistent offenders begin exhibiting antisocial, violent, and or delinquent behavior prior to adolescence. Therefore, while there is a high rate of juvenile delinquency, it is the small percentage of life course persistent career criminals that are responsible for most of the violent crimes. The theories. There are a multitude of different theories on the causes of crime, most, if not all, of which are applicable to the causes of juvenile delinquency. Rational choice. Classical criminology stresses that the cause of crime lie within individual offenders rather than in their external environment. For classicists, offenders are motivated by rational self-interest, and the importance of free will and personal responsibility is emphasized. Rational choice theory is the clearest example of the idea. Delinquency is one of the major factors motivated by rational choice. Social disorganization. Current positive approach generally focus on the culture, a type of criminological theory attributing variation in crime and delinquency over time and among territories to the absence of breakdown of communal institutions, such as family, school, church, and social groups, and communal relationships that traditionally encourage cooperative relationships among people. The strain theory associated mainly with the work of Robert K. Merton, who felt that there are institutionalized paths to success in society. Strain theory holds that crime is caused by the difficulty for those in poverty have to achieve socially valued goals by legitimate means, since those with, for instance, poor educational attainment have difficulty achieving wealth and status by securing well-paid employment. They are more likely to use criminal means to obtain those goals. Merton suggests 5 adaptations to this dilemma. First one, innovation. Individuals who accept socially approved goals but not necessarily the socially approved means. Second one is retrietism. Those who reject socially approved goals and the means for acquiring them. The third one is ritualism. Those who buy into a system of socially approved means but lose sight of the goals. Merton believed that drug users are in this category. Conformity. Those who conform to the system, means, and goals. Rebellion. People who negate socially approved goals and means by recreating a new system of acceptable goals and means. A difficulty with strain theory is that it does not explore why children of low-income families have poor educational attainment in the first place. More importantly, much youth crime does not have an economic motivation. Strain theory fails to explain violent crime, the type of youth crimes that causes most anxiety to the public. Differential association. Differential association is another theory that deals with young people in group contexts and looks at how peer pressure and the existence of gangs could lead them into crime. It suggests young people are motivated to commit crimes by delinquent peers and learn criminal skills from them. The diminished influence of peers after memory has also been cited, cited as a factor in desisting from offending. There is strong evidence that young people with criminal friends are more likely to commit crimes themselves. However, offenders may prefer to associate with one another rather than delinquent peers causing someone to start offending. Furthermore, there is the question of how the delinquent peer group initially became delinquent. Labeling. Labeling theory is a concept in criminology that aims to explain deviant behavior from the social context, rather than the individual themselves. It is part of interactionism criminology, which states that once young people have been labeled as a criminal, they are more likely to offend. The idea is that once labeled as a deviant, a young person may accept that role and be more likely to associate with others who have been similarly labeled. Labeling theories say that male children from poor families are more likely to be labeled deviant, which may partially explain the existence of more working-class young male offenders. Social controls. Social control theory proposes that exploiting the process of socialization and social learning builds self-control and can reduce the inclination to indulge in behavior that is recognized as antisocial. These 4 types of control can help prevent juvenile delinquency. Direct, by which punishment is written or applied for wrongful behavior, non-compliance is rewarded by parents, family, and authority figures. Internal, by which a youth refrains from delinquency through the conscience or superego. Indirect, by identification with those who influence behavior, such as because the delinquent act might cause pain and disappointment to parents and other close relationships. Control, through needs satisfaction, evolve and individuals' needs are met. There is no point in criminal activity. Prevention. So this is how to prevent the juvenile delinquency. For those who started to get bored, please listen to this. So because this is an important info or an important things that you should listen to the material, because this is how to prevent, cure juvenile, or cure the juvenile delinquency. Delinquency prevention is the broad term for all efforts aimed at preventing youth from becoming involved in criminal or other antisocial activity. Prevention services may include activities such as substance abuse education and treatment, family counseling, youth mentoring, parenting education, educational support, and youth sheltering. Increasing availability and use of family planning services, including education and contraceptives, helps to reduce unintended pregnancy and unwanted births, which are risk factors for delinquency. It has been noted that often interventions such as peer groups may leave at-risk children worse off than if there had never been an intervention. Punishment. In 2020, a ruling abolished the death penalty for juveniles in Saudi Arabia. Despite this, Mustafa Hashim al-Darwish was executed in June 2021. He was alleged to have taken part of anti-government demonstration at the age of 17. Al-Darwish had been detained in May 2015, being placed in solitary confinement for years. Al-Darwish claimed that he faced brutal torture and beatings and was forced to sign confessions. One criminal justice approach to juvenile delinquency is through the juvenile court systems. These courts are specifically for minors to be tried in. Sometimes, juvenile offenders are sent to adult prisons. In the United States, children as young as 8 can be tried and convicted as adults. Additionally, the United States was the only recorded country to sentence children as young as 13 to life sentences without parole, as also known as death in prison sentences. As of 2012, the Supreme Court has declared death in prison sentences unconstitutional for the vast majority of cases involving children. According to the US Department of Justice, about 3,600 children are housed in adult jails. According to a report released by the Prison Policy Initiative, over 48,000 children are held in juvenile detention centers or prisons in centers are sometimes subject to many of the same punishments as adults, such as solitary confinement despite a younger age and the presence of disabilities due to the influx of minors in detention facilities due to the school to prison pipeline. Education is increasingly becoming a concern. Children in juvenile detention have a compromised or non-existent schooling, which to a higher number of dropouts and failure to complete secondary education. Policies.
Educational promotes economic growth, national productivity and innovations, and values of democracy and social cohesion. Prevention through education has been seen to discourage delinquency for minors and help them strengthen the connection and understanding between peers. A well-known intervention treatment is the scared straight treatment. According to research done by Scott Lilienfeld, this type of intervention is often harmful because of juvenile offenders' vicarious exposure to criminal role models and the possibility of increased resentment in reaction to the confrontational interactions. It has been reasoned that the most efficient interventions are those that not only separate at-risk teens from antisocial peers and place them instead with pro-social ones, but also simultaneously improve their home environment by training parents with appropriate parenting styles. In response to the data correlated with the school-to-prison pipeline, some institutions have implemented restorative justice policies. The restorative justice approach emphasizes conflict resolution and non-punitive intervention. Interventions such as hiring more counselors as opposed to security professionals or focusing on talking through problems will be included in a restorative justice approach. It is also important to note certain works of legislation that have already been published in the United States in response to juvenile prisoner reentry, extending to juveniles, such as the Second Chance Act 2007 and most recently the Second Chance Reauthorization Act of 2018. Juvenile reform. Juvenile reform deals with the vocational programs and educational approaching to reducing recidivism rates of juvenile offenders. Most countries in the world legislate processes for juvenile reform and reentry. Some more elaborate and formal than others. In theory, juvenile reentry is system to the fact that juveniles are young and assumes they are capable of change. It approaches a juvenile offender's situation and history holistically, evaluating the earlier factors that could lead to a juvenile commit crimes. In practice, this is complicated since juvenile delinquents return home to varying and unpredictable circumstances, including poverty, substance abuse, domestic violence, and others. In the United States, juvenile reform is split into four main phases. The first one, the entry phase. The youth enters residential placement. The second one, the placement phase. Amount of time youth is the placement facility, whatever that may be. The third one, the transitional phase, re-entry. Act of leaving facility and entering community, from right after exit of facility to right before entering community. The last one, the community-based after-case phase. Period of time after youth returns to the community, usually 120-day period right after transitional phase, and understanding of the factors involved in each of these steps is crucial to creating an effective juvenile reform program. One nonprofit identifies the following approaches to juvenile reform. 1. Early intervention. Preventing juvenile youth from ever encountering the justice system by implementation of conflict resolution practice or administrative strategies that aim to teach the child healthy actions to take in difficult situations. It is implemented before any offense is committed and often involves a thorough discussion or what individual issues a child is dealing with. 2. Diversion. The placement of youth in programs that redirect youth away from juvenile justice system processing.
or programs that divert youth from secure detention in a juvenile justice facility. These programs are more often an attempt to protect juveniles from getting charged on the record after they have already committed a crime. This can be led through school administration intervention or by law enforcement officers that have been trained in dealing with the risk youth. These programs are often given to children who have unstable life circumstances and are thus extended aid that will attack the root problems rather than further isolate them in society. 3. Alternatives to secure confinement. A juvenile justice approach that does not require the juvenile's entry in jail-like facility often involves the juvenile's continued participation in society, but in a modified manner. Such alternatives include home confinement, supervision of a probation officer, community service requirements, and community-based facilities, among others. 4. Evidence-based practices. The emphasis on encouraging youth participation in programs that have evidence of working, the evaluation of success for a program is dependent on multiple factors, such as reduction of recidivism rates, cost effectiveness, and addressing health problems. Diverting youth who commit status offenses, programs that address the root problems causing a juvenile's behavior and actions. Such programs are often part of a tiered approach to juvenile justice and reform. The last one is funding community-based alternatives on a large scale. The supporting of initiatives in the community that have been proven to help with juvenile betterment and reform. This allows the community to have its own and does not rely on the decision of state regarding needs of juvenile. Wait, I'm gonna drink first. My throat started to dry. Okay, continue. While juvenile reform has proved to be an effective and humanizing response to juvenile delinquency, it is a very complex area that still has many ongoing debates. For example, many countries around the world are debating the appropriate age of a juvenile, as well as trying to understand whether there are some crimes that are so heinous they should be exempt from any understanding. Based on these discussions, legislation needs to be consistently updated and considered as the social, cultural, and political landscapes change. Juvenile sex crimes. Juveniles who commit sexual crimes refer to individuals adjudicated in a criminal court for a sexual crime. Sex crimes are defined as sexually abusive behavior committed by a person under the age of 18 that is perpetrated against the victim's will, without consent, and in an aggressive, exploitative, manipulative, and/or threatening manner. It is important to utilize appropriate terminology for juvenile sex offenders. Harsh and inappropriate expressions include terms such as pedophile, child molester, predator, perpetrator, and mini-perp. These terms have often been associated with this group, regardless of the youth age, diagnosis, cognitive abilities, or developmental stage. Using appropriate expressions can facilitate a more accurate depiction of juvenile sex offenders and may decrease the subsequent aversive psychological effects from using such labels. In the Arab Gulf states, homosexual acts are classified as an offense and constitute one of the primary crimes for which juvenile males are charged. Prevalence data.
Examining prevalence data and the characteristics of juvenile sex offenders is a fundamental component to obtain a precise understanding of this heterogeneous group. With mandatory reporting laws in place, it became unnecessary for providers to report any incidents of disclosed sexual abuse. Longo and Prescott indicate that juveniles commit approximately 30 until 60% of all child sexual abuse. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Uniform Crime reports indicate that in 2008, youth under the age of 18 accounted for 16.7% of forcible rapes and 20.61% of other sexual offenses. Center for Sex Offender Management indicates that approximately one-fifth of all rapes and one-half of all sexual child molestation can be accounted for by juveniles. Official record data. The Office for Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention indicates that 15% of juvenile arrests occurred for rape in 2006, and 12% were clearance resolved by an arrest. The total number of juvenile arrests in 2006 for forcible rape was 3,610, with 2% being female and 36% being under the age of 15 years. This trend has declined throughout the years, with forcible rape from 1997 until 2006 being minus 30% from 2005 to 2006 being minus 10%. The OJJDP reports that the juveniles arrest rate for forcible rape increased from the early 1980s through the 1990s. At that time, it fell again. Violent crimes rates in the US have been on a steady decline since the 1990s. The OJJDP also reported that the OJJDP also reported that the total number of juvenile arrests in 2006 for sex offenses other than forcible rape was 15,900, with 10% being female and 47 being under the age of 15. There was again a decrease with the trend throughout the years, with sex offenses from 1997 to 2006 being minus 6%, 16%, and from 2005 to 2006 being minus 9%. Males who committed sexual crimes. Barbary and Marshall indicate that juvenile males contribute to the majority of sex crimes, with 2 until 4% of adolescent males having reported committing sexually assaultive behavior, and 20% of all rapes and 30 until 50% of all child molestation are perpetrated by adolescent males. It is clear that males are overrepresented in this population. This is consistent with Ryan and Lane's research indicating that males account for 91 until 93% of the reported juvenile sex offenses. Redhand and Welch reported that females account for an estimated 2 until 11% of incidents of sexual offending. In addition, it reported by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention that in the juvenile arrest during 2006, African American male youth were disproportionately arrested, 34% for forcible rape is one case in a foster home. A 13-year-old boy raped a 9-year-old boy by having forced anal sex with him. What the hell? In a court hearing, the 9-year-old boy said he has done this multiple times. What? The 13-year-old boy was charged for sexual assault. Juvenile sex crimes internationally. Sexual crimes committed by juveniles are not just an issue in the United States. Studies from the Netherlands show that out of 3,200 sex offenders recorded by police in 2009,
672 of those were juveniles. Approximately 21% of sexual offenders. The study also points out the male to female ratio of sexual predators. In 2009, as US Congressman proposed legislature that would create an international sex offender registry, the bill was introduced due to the fact that because laws differ in different countries, someone who is on the sex offender registry with the US, who may be barred from living certain places and doing certain activities, has free range in other less developed countries. Wait. This can lead to child sex tourism, when a sexual predator will go to less developed countries and prey on young boys and girls. Carl Newburn, in his article The Prospect of an International Sex Offender Registry, point out some serious flaws in the proposed bill, such as creating safety issues within the communities for the sex offenders placed on the registry. Newburn suggests, instead of creating an international sex offender registry from the US, model the US join other countries in a dialogue on creating an effective model. As of now, no registry exists. Despite this, there's still interest in creating some sort of international registry. So it is enough for the juvenile delinquency metry or education. So I'm gonna say it again. This is an education. I'm trying to educate you guys on what is the juvenile delinquency and how to prevent it and what the types of the juvenile delinquency, which was a bad behavior and can be committed to a crime, can be led to a crime, like sexual crimes and murdering stuffs as a bad crimes. So I'm sorry if you get bored by me just reading the Wikipedia articles, but this is only for education and for the English Mega Project video. I'm so sorry for my bad English course because I'm still learning and I'm still trying to improve in English, my reading skills, my writing skills, and other skills in English. Hopefully you can get the benefits from this video, of course, because you have to know the informations from those three topics, which is first one is racism, which is the bad behavior, of course, global issues. The second one is the bullying, also global issues. And the last one is juvenile delinquency, which is the global issues as well. So I want the watchers or the people who watch this video to learn that those three topics were related and it is a bad behavior or global issues that we have to prevent from an act of that kind of three stuffs. So
maybe that's all from me. Once again, I'm sorry if I had many mistakes, of course, from those three uh, informations, from those three topics. I'm very sorry for reading or maybe a lot of mistakes. If you guys want to give a correction, please, I'm very pleased that you guys can give many corrections in the comment section below. Maybe that's all from me. See you on the next video. Peace out.